Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Terraria. Before I delay things even further, let's kick this world into hard mode. I decided to skip safety and not bother making a long enough path for the wall of flesh. I made sure to make some gaps through the buildings that stood in the way and sacrificed the guide. Wall of Flesh was a breeze to do, and even though it dropped 2 summoning items, I still wasn't certain what class I wanted to play. Jumping into hard mode hadn't ruined any current NPC houses, so I can go straight to destroying altars to bless the world with cobalt, mithril and titanium. Thankfully, my brain was still working at this point, so I made sure to save 1 altar for crafting purposes. So now started the long process of collecting ore, upgrading my pick, and returning back down to repeat the process. Quite early on, we did come across the wizard and a few other NPCs. Midway through, I did end up making some cobalt armor just to make things a little easier. Once I got to the point of gathering titanium, I decided to travel through hell for easier deposits and came across the underground hollow. This meant I can easily farm ore, crystal for potions, and gelatin crystals, which I could later use to summon the green slime. Since I just finished those steps of progression, one of the mechanical bosses decided to spook me. Through my blind panic of trying to prepare for it to spawn, I must have spent too long reforging with the goblin, since it never showed up. Thankfully, this gave me a bit more time to properly sort myself out, and as I went along upgrading my tools, weapons and armor, I also took time to figure out my trinkets. At this point, I decided I wanted to focus on a range build. While waiting to see if another boss would possibly naturally spawn, I decided it was a good time to farm some souls of flight. I had already set up a tree farm next to a sky island, so once I got some water candles placed down, it was easy farming. Although I got plenty of souls of flight, I didn't get a single giant harpy feather, so instead of fixating myself on making wings, I decided to use up my queen slime summons. This fight wasn't too challenging in the gear I had, and it went down pretty fast. I will admit the nurse's location isn't exactly the most practical, but for once I wanted to put some effort into building structures in this world. Unfortunately, the first drop had nothing I was looking for, so I killed her a few more times and managed to get myself a saddle. Admittedly, I still don't use mounts that much in fights, but it's something I definitely want to improve on. I decided it was a good time to return to getting myself some wings, and instead of going to kill more harpies, I focused on getting pixie dust. Thankfully, I got rewarded for this choice and bagged myself a lowkey. At this point, I felt ready for the mechanical bosses, and instead of waiting around for natural spawns, I figured I would just make the summons for them. I wasn't lacking on many materials, and the souls I needed to farm up weren't too far down from my spawn. There was a spider cave right next to it, so while farming souls, I also managed to bag myself a summoning set. Without wasting any more time, I summoned probably one of my favourite bosses in the game, the Destroyer. I still have very fond memories of fighting this boss over 10 years ago with 2 other friends, where our strategy was to throw a whole bunch of molotovs at it. This kill took a little bit of time, but once I killed it I kind of realised I forgot to buff. Besides making a new repeater, there wasn't much more I could craft from just the 1 kill, so I decided to face the Destroyer once again. I wasn't too sure how long the other mechanical bosses would take, so I waited for the next night and got right back to work. Now that all the mechanical bosses were defeated, I could finally upgrade some stuff, although truthfully speaking, the only big thing that I needed here was the pickaxe. I'm not really sure why I started crafting armor, since I was literally about to go and farm the jungle, but you know, sometimes my brain ain't that smart. All that preparation beforehand paid off, since by the time I arrived, there was already a Plantera bob waiting next to the arena. I normally find farming both hearts and ore in the jungle takes me the longest time, and no matter how many trips I do, I always find out I need to do even more trips. Armor was the first thing I upgraded, and even though the pickaxe power was the same percentage as my current one, I did end up making a spare. It was during this time that I became ill IRL, and even though it slowed down recording progress, it was an excellent excuse to do a bunch of things off camera. A lot of time was put towards collecting ore and hearts in the jungle, making some utility items such as the void bag, and I even managed to work on a few buildings. The shimmer was actually such a huge help for improving my trinkets. Things like the Unk Shield took hardly any time to make up. When I got back to feeling a bit better, I gathered my last heart and got right to facing Plantera. Although we got the grenade launcher as our first drop, I decided against using it since it isn't my kind of weapon. I did look around for more Plantera bulbs, and while doing so, I visited the shimmer to chuck in a spare life fruit for another permanent buff. I managed to fight Plantera 2 more times, and on the last kill we got a pygmy star. Although I'm not planning to play a summoner build, it's always nice to have a summon or two to help out. I made sure to reforge my new items before heading into the dungeon. The hollow chest was close to the top and I got myself a nice little rainbow gun. It wasn't that item I was planning to use, but it was nice to pick up. At first I was pretty cautious running around the dungeon. Normally, in all my playthroughs, I end up playing as a tank in a nice comfy set of turtle armor. Luckily, I didn't get punished playing a squishier spec, so I made myself a nice little area to farm. It took a while for me to get the sniper rifle, and by the time it dropped, I had also got myself some extra handy loot that would be good for other builds. I did wonder why Truffle hadn't shown up yet. I'd been in hard mode for a good while now, so after converting the Sky Island, I was able to buy myself an auto hammer. And no surprise, I had to make yet another trip into the jungle for more ore. It didn't take too long to gather the materials, and I upgraded my armor once again. For now, I decided to go down the route of having my headpiece benefit guns, since the sniper rifle was my main ranged weapon. Even though I still have the golem to do, I had the realization that I needed to start farming summons for both the Empress of Light and Duke Fishron. While starting off farming Prismatic Lacewing, I got myself a cheeky frozen key, so once heading back into the dungeon, I got myself a nice sentry weapon. I'll spare you guys from having to watch me catch a few summons, and before we end the episode, I figured I'd take a few minutes to share some of the buildings I've done. I'm definitely not someone who builds in games, especially Terraria, but this time around I wanted to give it a go. Terraria is filled with such talented, amazing players, so coming by some inspiration was an enjoyable experience. I worked with the materials I had available and things managed to work out. I still have an area or two to build, but I'll save working on that for another time. We've already gone way over time I normally take for these, so thank you all so much for watching this episode of Terraria. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.